So, you want to own an airline. Not fly one, not work for one, but own one. You want your name on the tail, your logo on 10,000 baggage tags, and your face on the cover of an in-flight magazine that nobody reads. You want to find the planes, hire the pilots, sell the tickets, and watch the money roll in. That is the idea anyway. Here is what is actually going on underneath that idea. The first thing you need to understand is why anyone wants this in the first place. Because on paper, it makes almost no sense. You are about to enter one of the only industries in the world where you can move a human being across an entire continent at 500 miles an hour, feed them, entertain them, get them there safely, and still only make about $12 of profit off of them. Apple makes more money selling a rubber phone case than an airline makes flying you from New York to Los Angeles.
The plane is making excellent progress.
Why do people still want in? Prestige, mostly. An airline is a flying billboard. Every time one of your planes takes off, your brand is visible from the ground, from the terminal, and from the in-flight app on 10,000 phones. It is also a matter of national importance. Airlines move cargo, business travelers, soldiers, and diplomats when governments need them to. Owning one puts you in a room most billionaires never get invited into. And there is global reach. Very few businesses let you say you have a physical presence on 6 continents by Thursday afternoon. That is the appeal. Now, let's talk about what it costs to actually do this. First, you need permission. In the United States, you cannot just buy some planes and start selling tickets. You need 2 separate approvals from 2 separate federal agencies. The Department of Transportation has to certify that you are, in their language, economically fit, meaning you have enough money to survive, a real operating plan, and management that knows what it is doing. The Federal Aviation Administration has to certify that you are safe enough to fly, which usually means a Part 121 air carrier certificate if you want to run scheduled commercial flights. The DOT does not just ask if you have money. They ask if you have enough money to cover every pre-operating expense, plus a reserve equal to 3 full months of normal operating costs before you have sold a single ticket. When Breeze Airways entered the U.S. market a few years ago, they did not scrape by. They raised over $300 million before they ever got off the ground. An $83 million Series A round was followed by a $200 million Series B. That is the price of admission, just to be taken seriously by regulators. And that is before a single plane has a single passenger in a single seat. There is also a citizenship requirement most people do not know about. U.S. law requires that American citizens control at least 75% of the voting interest in the airline. The president and 2/3 of the board have to be American citizens too. This is not a suggestion. It is federal law designed to keep foreign governments from quietly controlling U.S. transportation infrastructure. You also need people, real, specific, government-mandated people. A director of safety, a director of operations, a chief pilot, a director of maintenance, and a chief inspector. These are not job titles you can invent later. The law requires you to have them before you fly. And the people filling those seats need serious credentials, like an airline transport pilot certificate and years of supervisory experience on large aircraft. You are not hiring 5 employees. You are hiring 5 extremely specific and extremely expensive experts, and you are competing with every other airline in the country for the same small pool of them. That is the entry fee just to exist as a legal airline. Now, let's talk about the actual product, the planes. The commercial aircraft market is essentially a 2-company monopoly, Boeing and Airbus. That is it. Those are your options if you want a new aircraft. And here is the first trap. The prices you see reported in the news are almost never the prices anyone actually pays. A Boeing 737 MAX 8 has a published list price north of $117 million. Nobody pays that. Real transaction prices, after volume discounts and negotiation, usually land somewhere between $50 million
Không phải là
and
117
$65
triệu.
million.
Không,
The Airbus
không.
A320
Chúng tôi đã đánh dấu
its
nó.
direct competitor,
Nó thấp
follows
hơn
the
nhiều.
same pattern. List price is around $110 million, with the real price in that same $50 to $65 million range. Move up to wide-body aircraft, the ones used for long international routes, and the numbers get considerably more painful. A Boeing 787-9 lists near $292 million, with real prices ranging anywhere from $75 million up to $161 million, depending on configuration. An Airbus A350-1000 can run you anywhere from $180 million to $230 million, even after negotiation. Regional aircraft, the smaller jets that feed passengers from tiny cities into major hubs, are comparatively cheap. An Embraer E175 runs $25 to $28 million. But cheap is relative. You still need a fleet of them, and each one still needs a full maintenance program, full crew, and full insurance. Here is where the first real decision point shows up. Do you buy these planes outright, or do you lease them? Almost nobody buys outright anymore. The global aircraft leasing market is projected to hit $229.6 billion by 2026, and there is a reason for that. Leasing means you are not tying up hundreds of millions of dollars of your own capital in a depreciating hunk of metal. It means the leasing company, not you, absorbs the risk if the aircraft's resale value collapses. And it gives you flexibility to grow or shrink your fleet as demand changes, instead of being stuck owning planes you no longer need. Most leases are what is called a dry lease. You get the aircraft, and you bring your own crew, your own maintenance program, and your own insurance. Over 83% of the leasing market works this way. There is also wet leasing, where the leasing company gives you the aircraft, the crew, the maintenance, and the insurance as one complete package. This is useful in an emergency or for short bursts of extra capacity, but it is expensive because you
Chào
are
mừng
paying
đến với
someone
bài
else
thuyết
to
trình về
handle
mục tiêu dự
everything.
án tổng thể của chúng
There is
tôi.
also a clever trick some airlines use called a sale leaseback. You buy a brand new aircraft directly from Boeing or Airbus. Then, almost immediately, you sell it to a leasing company like AerCap or Air Lease Corporation. Then you sign a long-term lease to fly the exact same plane you just sold. Why would anyone do this? Because it instantly puts cash back on your balance sheet while your operations continue without a single day of interruption. It sounds like financial sleight of hand, and honestly, it kind of is. But it is completely legal and extremely common. So, now you have your license, your mandatory executives, and your fleet, either bought or leased. Time to figure out how you are actually going to run the airline. Because there is not just one way to do this. There are three basic models. Full-service carriers, like Delta, United, and American, run what is called a hub-and-spoke system. Passengers from dozens of smaller cities all funnel into a handful of massive hub airports, then get redistributed to their final destinations. It is inefficient in some ways, more congestion, more delay risk, more overhead. But it is the only mathematically sound way to gather enough passengers in one place to fill an international wide-body flight, which is where the real profit is. Low-cost carriers like Southwest skip the hub entirely and fly point-to-point, city-to-city, direct with no funneling. Planes spend less time sitting on the ground, turn around faster, and the whole operation is simpler. Ultra-low-cost carriers, like Spirit and Frontier, take that same point-to-point model and strip it down even further. Every single extra is unbundled and sold separately. The base ticket is often sold at a loss, on purpose. The airline survives entirely on what you pay for beyond the seat itself. This brings us to one of the strangest hidden assets in the entire industry, the airport slot. At certain airports, like JFK, LaGuardia, and Reagan National in Washington, there are only so many takeoffs and landings the runways can physically handle in a day. So, the FAA hands out a fixed number of slots, and if you do not have one, you cannot land there, period. It does not matter how big your airline is. To keep your slot, you have to actually use it at least 80% of the time during a scheduling season, or you lose it. This is called use it or lose it, and it turns a slot into one of the most valuable pieces of intangible property
Thank you, I appreciate
in the
it.
entire industry.
Looks like a done deal.
At major global hubs, a single prime slot pair, one takeoff and one landing, has sold on the secondary market for as much as $75 million for the right to land a plane. Not the plane, just the right to land it. Now, let's get into the costs that actually eat your revenue every single day you operate, because this is where most people's mental math falls apart. In 2024, the average cost of running a U.S. passenger aircraft came out to $100.26 per minute of block time, meaning every minute from the second the aircraft starts moving to the second it parks at the gate. Every minute, whether the flight is full or empty. Labor is the single biggest piece of that at $35.23 per block minute. Labor costs have changed dramatically in the last few years because of a pilot shortage, especially at the regional level. A first-year first officer at a regional airline can now expect to make between $75,000 and $100,000, a number that would have seemed absurd a decade ago. Senior regional captains can clear over $150,000 to $200,000. At the legacy level, Delta, United, American, a senior wide-body captain with 12 years of experience can pull in $350,000 to $500,000 annually once profit sharing is included. Flight attendants have their own quiet history of being underpaid in a very specific way. For decades, flight attendants were only paid once the aircraft doors closed and the brakes released, meaning the entire boarding process, sometimes 45 minutes of work, was completely unpaid. That changed recently. A historic 2026 agreement at United finally introduced boarding pay, compensated at half the normal hourly rate during the scheduled boarding window. Entry-level flight attendants still start relatively low, around $27,000 to $35,000 in their first year, largely because new hires spend much of that time on reserve status, meaning they are on call and can be summoned to fly with almost no notice. But senior pursers on international wide-body routes, with language skills and years of seniority, can make anywhere from $115,000 to $140,000 a year. Fuel is the second biggest cost, averaging $33.06 per block minute. Fuel is genuinely one of the scariest line items in this entire industry because you do not control the price. Crude oil prices swing. Refining margins, what is called the crack spread. The premium refineries charge to turn crude oil into usable jet fuel can spike without warning, sometimes adding $60 or more to the cost of a single barrel overnight. To protect against this, airlines hedge fuel costs, essentially locking in a future price today through financial contracts. It sounds smart, but here is the trap. If oil prices later fall, the airline is stuck paying the higher locked-in price anyway.
The current fueling rate is $33.06
on
per minute.
Contracts that seemed brilliant the day they were signed. Delta tried something different. In 2012, they bought an actual oil refinery in Pennsylvania for $150 million. Analysts mocked the decision at the time. An airline running a refinery seemed like a distraction from their real business. But the logic was simple. When the crack spread spikes and every other airline is bleeding money on fuel, Delta's refinery profits from that exact same spike because refining is exactly what a refinery does. During periods of extreme market dislocation, that one refinery has generated between $300 million and $785 million of relief for the company. The lesson here is not to buy a refinery. It is that in an industry where you do not control your biggest cost, sometimes the only real hedge is owning the thing that creates the cost in the first place. Maintenance eats another 10 to 15% of total operating costs, or about $18.30 per block minute. Maintenance is not optional or flexible. It is a strict tiered system of inspections. An A-check happens roughly every 2 to 3 months, takes 50 to 130 labor hours, and is usually done overnight. A C-check happens every 20 to 24 months, takes up to 6,000 labor hours, keeps the aircraft grounded for 1 to 4 weeks, and
Kiểm tra lại
costs
giấy
between
cáp. Xong rồi, tiếp tục
$800,000
thôi.
and $1.5 million for a narrow-body jet. The D-check, the big one, happens every 6 to 12 years. It means essentially disassembling the entire aircraft down to bare metal, removing the engines and landing gear, and rebuilding everything. That process alone consumes 30 to 50,000 labor hours, costs $1.5 to $3 million, and grounds the aircraft for 4 to 6 weeks straight. That is 6 weeks where that airplane is earning you exactly $0 while still costing you money to store and insure. Engines are their own universe of expense. A single performance restoration on a modern narrow-body engine easily exceeds $1.5 million. If the engine's internal life-limited parts need full replacement, the components with a hard expiration date, no matter how well maintained, a full overhaul on a wide-body engine can run $8 to $12 million per engine. Then there is insurance, which most people never think about until something goes wrong. Global aviation insurance premiums exceed $8 billion a year, usually running 1 to 2% of an airline's total operating expenses. Hull insurance, which covers physical damage to the aircraft,
Điều gì đã xảy ra
typically
vậy?
costs
Chúng bị hỏng rồi thưa ngài.
0.6 to
Làm sao điều này có thể xảy ra
1.5%
được?
of the
Chúng tôi đã
aircraft's
kiểm tra
insured
kỹ lưỡng,
value
nhưng đây là
every
lỗi của vận
single
chuyển.
year. Passenger liability insurance has to cover the fact that U.S. courts routinely award enormous settlements. The average value assigned to a single life lost in a U.S. aviation accident sits around $5.2 million. Airlines need to carry coverage that can absorb dozens of those claims at once if the worst happens. War risk insurance, which covers terrorism and conflict zones, has seen premiums surge by 50 to 500% in recent years, as global instability spreads and insurers reprice risk almost in real time. Airport fees are next, and they work like a local monopoly tax. Airports charge rent per square foot for ticket counters, gates, and baggage areas. A major hub-dependent airline can pay over $400,000 a month just in terminal rent. Landing fees are based on aircraft weight. At JFK, for example, it is $847 per $1,000 lbs, meaning a Boeing 737 pays roughly $600 to $700 just to touch down, while a fully loaded wide-body pays thousands per landing. Air traffic control is funded differently depending on where you fly. In Europe, airlines are billed directly based on aircraft weight and distance flown, generating over €13.2 billion a year for the system. In the U.S., it is the opposite. Instead of billing the airline, the government taxes the passenger directly through a 7.5% ticket tax,
Landing weight
a $5.20 domestic segment fee,
pounds.
and a small excise
Perfect.
tax on jet fuel. The one place the FAA does bill airlines directly is for aircraft that fly over the U.S. without landing. $61.75 per $100 nautical miles for regular airspace and $26.51 for oceanic routes. Ground handling and catering round out the daily grind. Loading bags, refueling, catering, and pushback are all either done in-house or paid to a third party per turnaround. An economy meal costs the airline $5 to $15 to produce. Business class jumps to $30 to $50. First class with a celebrity chef attached can run $100 to $300 per passenger. and airlines are notoriously obsessive about shaving pennies here. American Airlines once saved $40,000 a year just by removing a single olive from their first-class salad. So, that is the cost side. A relentless stacking pile of expenses that exist whether your plane flies full or empty. Now, let's talk about how you actually make money back, because this is where the story gets interesting. The core mechanism is yield management. An airline seat is the most perishable product in the world. The moment that plane pushes back from the
Một quả
gate,
ô liu.
every empty seat on it
Tại sao?
represents revenue that is gone forever. You cannot sell it tomorrow. It is just lost. So, airlines divide every flight into dozens of invisible price tiers called fare buckets. Months before departure, they release the cheapest buckets aimed at price-sensitive leisure travelers who book early. As the flight fills up, the algorithm closes those cheap buckets one by one until, close to departure, only the most expensive fares remain, aimed squarely at business travelers who need to fly regardless of price and are booking at the last minute. This is why two people sitting next to each other can pay wildly different prices for the identical seat. It is not random. It is precision-targeted revenue extraction, recalculated constantly based on demand, competitor pricing, and how fast the plane is filling up. To distribute these fares to travel agencies and corporate booking systems, airlines rely on global distribution systems, Sabre, Amadeus, and Travelport. Every ticket sold through these systems costs the airline $12 to $26, or 2 to 4% of the ticket price in fees, which is exactly why airlines beg you to book directly on their own website instead. The industry's break-even load factor, the percentage of seats that must be sold just to cover a flight's costs, is brutally high. The global passenger load factor is forecast to hit a record 83.8% in 2026. That means airlines are now designed structurally to fly almost completely full planes just to survive, let alone profit. Beneath the passenger cabin, cargo is a quiet but massive source of income. Belly freight, mail contracts, and e-commerce packages. Global airline cargo revenue is projected to hit $158 billion in 2026. And above the cabin, the unbundling of the ticket itself has created an entire secondary economy. Checked bag fees, seat selection, priority boarding, and Wi-Fi ancillary revenue now makes up nearly 14% of total industry revenue. For ultra-low-cost carriers, it is not a bonus. It is the entire business model. The ticket price is bait. The fees are the meal. But here is the part almost nobody outside the industry understands, and it is the single most important structural fact in modern airline economics. The actual biggest moneymaker at a major airline is not flying planes. It is the loyalty program. Airlines mint frequent flyer miles at essentially zero cost. They are just numbers in a database. Then they sell those miles in enormous bulk to banks like American Express and Chase, who use them to attract credit card customers. In 2026, Delta alone reported over $8.4 billion in annual revenue from its co-branded card partnership with American Express. That $8.4 billion from a loyalty program dwarfs what many entire airlines earn from flying passengers. This is such a significant shift that the major U.S. carriers have completely abandoned the old system of earning miles based on distance flown. Now, miles and elite status are earned based on how much money you spend, meaning your credit card spending matters more to your airline status than the number of miles you have actually flown. In a very real sense, the airline itself has become a marketing and data collection subsidiary of a bank, one that happens to also operate airplanes. Now, for the volatility, the part of the story where the math you just did stops being reliable. Airlines run on razor-thin margins even in a good year. The global airline industry's net profit margin is forecast to sit at just 3.9% in 2026, meaning a projected net profit of about $7.90 per passenger globally. U.S. carriers do slightly better at around $11 per passenger. That is not the ticket price. That is the entire profit after every single cost we just walked through, per
Nhìn
person,
này,
per
một đồng
flight.
tiền vàng, giá
And
trị
that
của nó là
thin
7 đồng
margin
giờ
has
90
almost
cent.
no cushion against
Tôi sẽ
shocks.
cố lấy nó.
Fuel prices spike without warning. Pandemics ground entire fleets overnight. Interest rates rise and crush highly leveraged balance sheets. When any of these hit an airline that is already carrying enormous fixed costs and heavy debt, the result is often bankruptcy. Spirit Airlines is the clearest recent example. In late 2024, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and by 2025, it was back in a second round of restructuring. It was not one single mistake. It was three things landing at once. A wave of Pratt & Whitney engine recalls that grounded a huge portion of the fleet, a proposed $3.8 billion acquisition by JetBlue that got blocked by federal antitrust regulators, and relentless price competition from legacy carriers who introduced stripped-down basic economy fares specifically to poach Spirit's price-sensitive customers using their own superior route networks. Spirit understood the ultra-low-cost model better than almost anyone in the industry, and it still nearly collapsed twice. That is the honest lesson of this entire sector. Expertise does not protect you from structural risk. The system itself can shift under even the smartest operators. Delays and cancellations pile onto this volatility. A delay costs a U.S. airline that same $100.76 per minute in direct costs, and delays cascade. Crew members time out under FAA rest rules, forcing cancellations of flights that had nothing to do with the original problem. Nationally, the FAA estimates delays cost airlines and passengers over $33 billion a year. In 2024, the Department of Transportation made this more expensive for airlines
Không thể
by
tin được.
requiring automatic cash refunds
Tất cả
for
đều bị
major
hủy.
delays and cancellations,
Làm thế nào bây giờ?
closing the old loophole where airlines could just hand out travel vouchers and hold on to the cash. Environmental costs are the newest volatility factor. Sustainable aviation fuel can cut life cycle emissions by up to 80%, but it costs 2 to 4 times as much as regular jet fuel, and that premium is structural, not temporary. The government offers tax credits up to $1.75 per gallon to soften that gap, but airlines are also bound internationally by a program called CORSIA, which requires them to purchase carbon credits to offset emissions growth on international routes. Analysts estimate this could cost the global airline industry up to $127 billion between 2024 and 2035. So, let's run the two scenarios. The way you would actually have to think about this if you were the one signing the checks. The optimistic case, you run a well-capitalized, full-service carrier with strong hub dominance, valuable airport slots, and a thriving co-branded credit card partnership. Your load factors sit near that record 83.8%. Fuel prices stay stable. Your loyalty program alone generates billions in high-margin revenue, insulating your thin flying margins. In this world, the airline is less a transportation company and more a marketing arm for a bank, one that happens to be extremely profitable.
Good morning,
The
everyone.
realistic case,
we are on track for
fuel
a smooth
prices
flight.
spike unexpectedly. A round of engine recalls grounds part of your fleet. A competitor undercuts your fares on your busiest routes. Your maintenance bills come due at the worst possible time. Your margin, already sitting at just a few percent, evaporates completely. And instead of counting $11 of profit per passenger, you are counting losses in the hundreds of millions, the way Spirit did, twice. The difference between those two scenarios is not a rounding error. It is the difference between a company throwing off billions in loyalty revenue and a company filing for Chapter 11. The entire industry sits on that knife's edge permanently because the base business, the actual flying, was never designed to be highly profitable on its own. So, if you still want to own an airline, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying a transportation company. You are buying a capital-intensive, thinly margined, brutally regulated operation that happens to come attached to something genuinely valuable: a loyalty program, a slot portfolio, a brand. The planes are almost a cost of doing business. The real asset was never in the sky. It was in the
Chuyển
wallet
động
of
linh
everyone
hoạt.
who ever swiped a co-branded card just to earn a few extra miles. If this deep dive into the brutal economics of the skies changed how you look at your next flight, please subscribe and like the video. We are dissecting the complex systems and hidden histories that run our world. Join us as we uncover the next industry secret. The next vault opens soon.